Eva Kaili is a member of the European Parliament representing Greece, and until yesterday, she was also one of its 14 vice presidents. But following her arrest on suspicion of involvement in a bribery and corruption scandal, this happened.
We shall now proceed with the vote by roll call, and the vote is open. Vote is closed. And the vote is carried.
Kaili is a member of the Greek Pan-Hellenic Socialist Party, PASOK, as well as the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats within the European Parliament. But now she's been suspended from both. Last week, Belgian police raided various offices in the European Parliament, as well as 19 private homes, in connection with an alleged bribery plot. It's thought that Qatar, the current host of the World Cup, paid millions to European lawmakers in exchange for influence in the European Parliament. Qatar has come under intense scrutiny over its inhumane treatment of thousands of migrant workers who built the flashy stadiums now hosting those World Cup football matches, and it's also been criticised for its abysmal record on LGBTQ and women's rights. But that didn't stop Kaili praising the country in the European Parliament just last month.
Today, the World Cup in Qatar is a proof, actually, of how sports diplomacy can achieve a historical transformation of a country, with reforms that inspired the Arab world. ILO said that Qatar is a front-runner in labor rights, abolishing kafala and reducing minimum wage, despite the challenges that even European companies are denying to enforce these laws. They committed to a vision by choice, and they opened to the world. Still, some here are calling to discriminate them. They bully them, and they accuse everyone that talks to them or engages of corruption. But still, they take their gas. Still, they have their companies profiting billions there. We can promote our values, but we don't have the moral right for lectures to get cheap media attention.
Kaili was arrested during those raids by Belgian police, with the police also discovering €900,000 at her home. And her father was stopped by police while reportedly carrying a briefcase stuffed with £650,000 in cash. Keeping in the family, her partner has been arrested too, as have two lobbyists. But the scandal seems likely to go much further than just a handful of opportunists. Roberta Metsola is the president of the European Parliament, and she said this about the scandal. The enemies of democracy, for whom the very existence of this parliament is a threat, will stop at nothing. These malign actors linked to autocratic third countries have allegedly weaponized NGOs, unions, individuals, assistants, and members of the European Parliament in an effort to subdue our processes. Not assistants. Transparency International, a global anti-corruption organisation, sees the scandal as part of a larger problem with corruption in the European Parliament. Its EU director released this statement. While this may be the most egregious case of alleged corruption the European Parliament has seen in many years, it is not an isolated incident. Over many decades, the Parliament has allowed a culture of impunity to develop, with a combination of lax financial rules and controls and a complete lack of independent, or indeed any, ethics oversight. In many ways, it has become a law unto itself. Every serious attempt to improve accountability is blocked by the Parliament's ruling bureau, with the acquiescence of a majority of MEPs. Now, Eva Kaili's lawyer has denied that she accepted bribes from Qatar. Aaron, Luca Vicentini, the new General Secretary of the Trade Union Confederation, was arrested and released as a part of this same corruption probe. Is this a wake-up call for the international left and corruption?
Well, it's certainly a reminder that historically centre-left politicians and parties don't have especially clean hands in politics. Important to say that Metsola herself is from Malta, and they had, until very recently, a prime minister who was Joseph Muscat, who was implicated with connections. His chief of staff was allegedly connected to the killing of a journalist. So this idea that the Maltese political class has particularly clean hands to condemn that of Europe more widely is a bit of a jump. PASOK as well, the party which this lawmaker comes from, in the 1980s, 1990s, often embroiled in corruption scandals. So not new in that sense, but clearly the scale of it, and I think not just the scale, the nature of it is probably new, in so much as we now do have, in the 21st century, these incredibly affluent, often quite small states, which exercise really extraordinary power. Obviously, Qatar is the kind of standout example of this, but you also have UAE, obviously far larger, but still massive political weight, Saudi Arabia, Singapore. That is new. The idea that you can have these quite small countries with real clout. And it's important to say Qatar really does throw the money around, not just with regards to the likes of the European Parliament or to FIFA. When I say throw money around, I mean lawful lobbying. This, of course, is unclear whether or not it's happened or not with regards to this potentially criminal matter, but also funding various NGOs. TED, for instance, takes a great deal of money from Qatar. And this is a form of something which is analogous to corporate washing, but it's a state with clearly a mixed human rights record, to say the least. Until very recently, they had a labor system in that country with regards to immigrant labor, the kafala system, which was effectively a form of indentured labor. And so in terms of why they do these kinds of things, at the moment only lawfully, as far as we know, is to project soft power without having the kickback and the negativity that should be associated with kinds of policies that they do have. And so far, it looks like they've spent their money pretty well. They've not just won the World Cup, but they've had a great deal of kind of media and political guffawing over them in recent years. This is a big deal in so much, of course, that it's potentially criminal. And it may lift the lid on something far wider, which goes beyond just the European Parliament. But regarding the European Parliament, the extent to which European lawmakers themselves mark their own homework, of course, historically, this has been a criticism of the European Commission and its accounts, which weren't open to public scrutiny for decades, by the way, is something which just we keep on hearing with regards to Europe and the EU. And in a way, I'm kind of grateful we're no longer in the EU because, of course, if this story had happened and we were one of the member states, you can be damn sure we would have had a week-long feeding frenzy from the right-wing press about how this just shows and demonstrates how corrupt European politics is. Of course, our system is no better in many ways. I think it's probably worse.
Well, I'm glad you said that, Aaron, because let's take a quick look at Qatar's influence a little closer to home now. A Politico report has revealed that the Qatari government spent more than £260,000 on gifts and hospitality for British MPs since October last year, with the average gift amounting to just over £7,000. First up on the sidebar of shame is David Mundell, a Tory MP and former cabinet member. He took a trip to Qatar last year, valued at £7,000, and then he defended the country in a recent Westminster debate over its abysmal LGBTQ rights record. Next up, we have Alan Cairns. Alan Cairns is another Tory MP and former cabinet minister. He's also chair of the all-party parliamentary group on Qatar. He took 2 trips to Qatar, valued at £9,323. Now, the MP's Code of Conduct stipulates that if you've received money from a foreign power, you have to wait at least 6 months before initiating a parliamentary debate that could be to their advantage. Well, Cairns didn't break that rule, waiting just over 6 months before putting forward a debate in the Commons in October, in which he praised the Gulf state. Next up, we have Chris Bryant. Chris Bryant is a Labour MP who took a visit to Qatar valued at over £7,000. But don't worry, that hasn't stopped him from criticising the country. He condemned the decision to hold the World Cup in Qatar, and he said that though he went to put his human rights concerns to the Qatari government, they, quote, didn't want to listen, and it all felt wrong. And he regrets taking the trip. Aaron, is there a heightened panic around Qatari corruption in particular, as opposed to other forms of corruption, as a result of the World Cup scrutiny?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, I have asked myself this question several times. Does Qatar regret putting in a bid for the World Cup? Because when they did that, I mean, to the best of my recollection, it must have been 2010, something like that. I could be wrong. But they obviously did that to get a certain amount of cultural cachet, soft power, acceptance from the global community. You know, you don't go around invading or enacting regime change in countries which host the World Cup, right? You become a normal country, so to speak. So clearly there's that strategy to it. And of course, part of their economic growth model is lots of tourists, property development, and so on, land speculation. So you need to make it a destination. Of course, a World Cup can help in that regard. But of course, this year we've seen a massive spike in gas prices. You know, so any gas producer, whether it's Russia, Iran, Qatar, Algeria, the US, is loving it because you can just export your gas and make a mint. And if I was kind of part of the Qatari elite, I would just think maybe, well, we didn't really need to do all this, jumping through all the hoops for the West and having all this scrutiny and accountability and being told off and whatnot. We could have just sort of sold our gas and made loads of money. So, of course, they didn't know that would be the case more than a decade ago when they put in this bid for a World Cup or when they started contemplating a bid. But perhaps it wasn't in their rational self-interest to shine a global spotlight on what remains quite an autocratic regime.
It certainly seems to be drawing parallels with Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter as bad purchases of the year.